welcome to this epic episode, edition of Crush Your Mountain Health. And I am so thrilled and pleased to have with me this gentleman. I've been watching him for a few years. I've attended some of his online trainings. He always delivers, and he's an incredible guy, and you've got to learn from him. We're going to talk deeper with this gentleman right now. Let me tell you a little bit about Mr. Damon Cart. He's considered to be a natural talent by some of the best NLP trainers in the world. Now, let me just say what NLP is: Neuro Linguistic Programming. We're going to get into that. Now, his approach to guiding and teaching students brings to their awareness that they've been doing NLP all their lives without realizing it. And he empowers them with skills and resources to thrive and reach their full potential. With the understanding of how neuro-linguistic programming creates one's experience, a person can take charge of those programs and create the experience and the life that they want. So we're going to talk with him a little bit about that, what led him to that. We're going to learn some techniques that we can utilize right now, right today. I'm making sure that you get the value from this man. We can call him the wizard of the internet because he is powerful. I will not call him Gandalf. But other than that, we will say, Damon Cart, welcome to Crush Your Mountain Health.
Well, thank you. That was quite an introduction. I think Wizard of the Internet might sound more like I'm a software developer or something like that. I don't know. I don't know if that's quite a great title for me, but thank you very much for that introduction.
Well, do me a favor. Tell us your origin story, if you would. What led you to NLP?
Sure. I remember growing up. My father was very religious. I grew up in a very religious household, and I wasn't really connecting with religion that well. And that's what his focus was on me and my brothers. But when he would go into his room at night, after everyone would go to bed, I would hear he was listening to these old cassette tapes. And I would listen to that as best I could to hear what those people were saying, because I was curious. I was like, what is he listening to? And it turned out it was like a lot of personal development people like Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn and even Tony Robbins. And I thought, well, what they're saying sounds really interesting to me, more interesting than the religion that he was really pushing on me. And I kept hearing a very similar message come from all of these people he was listening to, and that was that your life is the destiny of your life is not just something you're handed; it's something that you're an active participant in, and that you have a lot of control over if you choose to exercise that control. And that message got buried really deep into my mind, and I always loved that idea of being able to have that kind of control over my life rather than just being, whatever's handed to you. And I understood that Tony Robbins did this thing called NLP. I didn't know much about it, but in college I learned more about it because I had a professor who taught a class called the Philosophy of Psychology, and he covered a lot of different modalities like Gestalt therapy, psychotherapy, and even hypnosis. And the last thing he introduced was NLP. And every time he would do a demonstration, he would ask for a volunteer, and then I would volunteer as much as I could because I found what he was doing fascinating. And every time I did one of these demonstrations, I felt like I understood things about myself and about reality that I hadn't understood before. And so I thought that was amazing. I kind of put it in the back of my mind, learn NLP at some point, but there weren't many people who were teaching it in New Orleans at the time. That's where I went to college, and I grew up nearby there. Mm. I was also a broke college student, so it wasn't like I was going to be able to run out and spend a lot of money on NLP training. And after I graduated college, it was around the time that 9/11 happened, and it was the first time I was out of school for my entire life. And I was just feeling, especially with the things that happened in 9/11, watching that on TV and just having my whole sense of self really shaken up. I fell into a depression. I didn't have health insurance at the time. I was bartending, and I reached out to my professor and I asked him if he could help me out because I was in a really bad position. He invites me into his office. He says, I don't need your money. I donate time or money to charity every time you come to see me, and come back next week and we'll do an actual session. I came back the next week And in one session, my depression, months of depression, was gone. And it just seemed absolutely amazing to me. You think of depression as something that you have to work on for months to come out of or take medication for.
Mhm.
And I was fine. Like, I walked out of his office and just like, did this really happen? And the next week I went back to see him, and we were both kind of like, "Man, I think I think I'm okay. Like, I don't really have any other, I don't feel depressed anymore. I feel happy." And I, again, once put another little check mark next to learn NLP at some point, and then went on with my life. I eventually moved to Los Angeles. Los Angeles led to moving here to Santa Cruz, where NLP was created. I didn't know that at the time that I was moving here, which is kind of weird, but kind of synchronistic, I think. And I started an insurance agency here in Santa Cruz. Within about 2 years, I was depressed again. So this is 10 years from the first time. This was at the height of the financial crisis. Didn't know anybody, never ran a business before, never done sales. And here I was, had a new wife, 2 kids, and trying to make a successful insurance business in a town that I knew nobody. So I fell into depression again and went to a therapist, did really traditional therapy for a year. And after a year, I finally came out of the depression, so 1 year versus just a single session with my professor. By this time, I had found that there was a place I was teaching NLP on the same campus, UCSC, where NLP was created. And they were doing that every summer. So I was like, okay, now's the time. I need to do this. I don't want to go back into falling into another depression, because if I don't take control of my mental health, just like one would take care of their physical health, I'm going to keep ending up back here. And so I realized then that your mental health is like physical health. You have to maintain it. You have to nurture it, and feed it a good diet of information. And so when I took that first training, something just clicked, and I was like, why hadn't I done this sooner? And I just, from that point on, was just doing one NLP training after another, sometimes I did a hypnosis training as well. And I couldn't get enough. And I just went on and took all the trainings that I could possibly take, and over a period of years, which eventually led me to meeting my mentor, Steve Andreas, who then really helped me take things to the next level.
Now, let's focus in on that for a second. What is NLP's basic premise, so that everyone understands what we're talking about?
Yeah. You are not living in what you might think is an objective reality. Science is focused on those objective truths that are observable, that can be observed by like all people, and that is a noble science. It is a noble thing, and I'm glad we have science. But up until NLP, one thing they weren't really studying was, well, what about subjective experience? And the truth is that everything we experience itself is subjective, because we think of our lives as a collection of experiences. But the truth is that you've only really had one solid stream of consciousness that has started from the time that you were born up until now. So even the idea of having an experience is subjective. It's not actual objective reality, but that's how we experience life. So everything is passed through your subjective filters, and everything that you're experiencing is based on your beliefs and your map of reality. So the idea originally with NLP was understanding that we don't operate from objective reality. We operate from a map that we've created internally, that's internally represented. And maps are useful, because if you think about the territory of something, the actual territory is something, you can make a map of that, which is very useful because it can fit in your pocket, or you can see things from a bird's eye view, and you can navigate where you want to go more easily. So that's what we do internally. We create an internal representation of what reality is, based on deleting certain information, because we can't access all information all the time. It'd be too much. And we also generalize information. So if I'm learning something new, for example, we take things that we already know and apply it to the new things that we're learning, which makes it easier and faster for us to learn. So we generalize information. And then we also distort, meaning we can think into the future. We can plan things that have not happened yet. We can come up with ideas and create things that have not happened. We can innovate. Now, all of these things have a downside and an upside to them. deletion, generalization, and distortion. If you delete too much information, this is when we find ourselves in stuck situations where we feel like we have no options.
Mm.
If we generalize too much, then we get into things like prejudice and racism and, you know, all those things that limit our sense of reality. And then if we distort too much, we can create a sense of well, we can become paranoid because we're worried about all the possibilities of all these things that have never happened but could happen. And so these things are the way that we create our reality is based on those premises: deletion, distortion, and generalization. And when we have a problem or get stuck, we know that we can, in NLP, understanding how we delete and generalize and distort, go in there and find new options, new resources, or maybe we make things more accurate to reality than what they were. And those things then open up possibilities where we can actually change either ourselves or the reality in which we live in to create more of what we want and get more of what we want.
Now, NLP was created by, or at least developed by Grinder and
Bandler.
Bandler, right? Okay, so let me make I get the first name. So John Grinder and Michael Bandler, or
Richard Bandler.
Richard Bandler.
Yeah, and then depending on your stance, Frank Pucelik, some people believe he was a part of it. Some people don't believe that he actually was one of the founders, but that's that's a different discussion.
Okay, yeah, I heard the name, but I didn't hear it as much as the other two. The other two was all over the place.
Yeah.
Okay, and I've seen Richard Bandler do some amazing things. I bought one of his books, and John Grinder as well. I don't know if they're both still alive, but I know
they are.
I know that I think Grinder is in does a lot of work with an NLP school in Europe.
Correct, so, but he lives here in the same town that I live in. I've bumped into him a few times.
You guys have coffee together? Or?
No, he's an interesting character. He's not. I mean, depending on, I guess, his mood, he can either be very friendly or very unfriendly. I've met both sides of him. Okay. And I've even invited him on my YouTube channel, and he's always told me no. I've interviewed his brother, and I recently interviewed Frank Pucelik. I've trained with Bandler, haven't interviewed him, but yeah, they're interesting characters to say the least.
Wow, yeah, I can imagine. You know, because it takes a certain amount of artful thinking, you know, to be able to put something like that together and to work in the way they did, like bringing in the famed hypnosis therapist, hypnotherapist, Milton Erickson, you know, and bringing that the Milton model into it and doing things like that. That said, you mentioned your mentor, Steve Andreas, and as I understand it, he developed a form of NLP called the self-concept.
Well, he created an NLP model. So NLP is based on modeling. And so everything that I was explaining before about deletion, generalization, and distortion, the idea was in understanding that that's the mechanism in which we experience reality. Then they wanted to go and find successful people and successful in whatever area, and find out how exactly do they delete, generalize, and distort their reality so that you could create a model out of that and then pass that on and teach it to other people. So for example, you might have two people who more or less live the same lives. They might have, grew up in the same town, had the same family structure, same basic morals and values, and one person's very successful and the other one's not. So what creates that? Well, obviously there's the internal, how that person perceives reality, how they function in life is going to determine how successful they are. So what in NLP, what they were doing is, well, let's model those people and let's create a model out of it, and like a success model, and then have people apply that success model to themselves and see if it works, see if it makes them successful, or in whatever way these people were successful. And it worked. And that was like the true test of what is the model effective. And so what Steve Andreas did is he realized he wanted to help people feel more certain about themselves and raise their self-esteem and their sense of confidence so that they would do extraordinary things, live extraordinary lives. And he understood that he had to sort of create a model of how we create our sense of self. And from that, which is based on a set of beliefs, from that, then any changes we make in our identity would have far-ranging effects. Because if you think about it, what is the one thing that all experiences in your life, every place you've been throughout time, what is the one thing that all of that has in common? You. So if you understand how you're creating your sense of you, then you can change it, and you can change it into a felt sense of your identity, in which being the person you want to be and living the life that you want to live. And so when you can understand how you're doing that and then change these generalizations to match up, to line up with your values, not only do you have more confidence and more self-esteem, but you feel like you have a sense of purpose in life. You feel like you can try many things and fail many times, and it doesn't matter because you'll be fine. Your identity becomes very resilient. And yeah, so that's what Steve created. And to me, I think, the creation of NLP is something so off the chart extraordinary. And especially when you think in terms of human potential and the human potential movement. And I feel like Steve's model, the self-concept model, was the crowning achievement of NLP. Now, some people might disagree with me on that, but I truly believe that after having spent a lot of time and many years studying NLP and trying out different models, there's no model that I've ever come across that had such extraordinarily transformational effects in my own life. And then working with clients, seeing how it changes their lives. And because like I said, when you change your sense of self, it changes everything else. All of your beliefs are based on the beliefs you have about yourself. So you change beliefs about yourself, it changes your beliefs about the external world.
Wow. Well, can it be useful when it comes to controlling or reversing, say, type 2 diabetes? And are there some simple techniques that our audience could maybe adopt, use at home to achieve their outcomes?
Sure. So my understanding of type 2 diabetes really has to do with habits and like eating and exercise, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Yeah. So we'd have to go to that level of, okay, so what created the problem to begin with, and then create new behaviors around that. So what I would first off do is I would elicit a person's values around what they want. So in this case, if you want to be healthier, in this case, then I would elicit your values behind that. Like, what would that do for you? What's important to you about that? And find out what your values are. And then from there, we look at those values, and I would ask the person then, are you each one of these values as we go through them? Meaning, do you possess this quality? And so that's really important. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. Let's say, health is a value, beyond the actual behaviors of being healthy. But like, if you're a healthy person, you could be a healthy person, and that could be both a physical thing and a mental thing. And so if I were to ask you, if I asked you, is health important to you? And you say yes, so therefore it's a value. And then I would say, are you a healthy person? And you might have a range of responses to that. You might say yes right away. And you feel very certain about that, which means you believe that about yourself. And hopefully, if you believe that about yourself, you have experiences and examples to back that up. Sometimes people believe things about themselves that aren't very accurate because they don't really have any examples. It's more about what they wish was true about themselves. And so that's something I want to check in too. Are they just saying that because they want this to be true about themselves, but they're actually not? And then another response might be, well, sometimes I am and sometimes I'm not. And that's what we call an ambiguous quality. And then somebody might say, no, I'm not healthy. And so that means they identify with the opposite. Now, first, we would need to understand how that person is making that generalization about themselves. And it has less to do with the content of their experiences and more to do with how they're structuring those experiences. Meaning, are they seeing visual examples of them? Are they hearing more voices in their head? Where are those voices located? Where are those images located? And then we also need to know, what is a quality? We model a quality that they feel very certain about themselves, that they also like about themselves. And so we find the structure of that. And so it's that template that we use to then map across to the examples of them being healthy. And so this would make them believe that they are in fact healthy, but also based on actual experiences of them behaving in a healthy way. And so this brings that information front and center. This is what you would unconsciously sort of bounce off of when you're living your everyday life. And so if that's the information that you're accessing as part of who you are, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and you start lining up with eating better. You start lining up with, doing more things for your health, maybe, sleeping better, exercising more. So when you believe you are something, it's really important that we align to it, because if we didn't, then we would feel lost, or like we don't know who we are. And we are hardwired to move away from any kind of chaos or confusion. And this is why, and this is what I think it's hard for some people. It's not hard to understand, it's easy to understand, but it's hard to grasp. The fact that if you believe something very negative and very limiting about yourself, you will still align to it. Your behaviors will align to it, because the alternative is just too scary. The alternative being, if I don't align my behaviors to what I believe about myself, then things are very confusing. I feel lost. I don't know who I am anymore. And so people would rather align with even negative and limiting beliefs, because they would rather avoid that feeling of being lost and confused.
Okay, so here's an interesting thing, okay? When we talk about a person's beliefs, isn't it true that sometimes they themselves are unconscious of those beliefs?
Most of the time, yeah.
Yeah. So what do you do to help them to become aware of those beliefs?
Well, through that process of finding out what their values are, and then asking them, are they in fact these values? A lot of this stuff really starts to come up a lot. And then, as I get that information, I will ask more and more specific questions about that. And then, these unconscious beliefs really start to come out, because especially when you start having someone make changes, and these are changes that are going to really alter their identity. If there's any resistance, or if there's any limiting beliefs, they're going to come up, and which is not a bad thing, because then we can actually deal with them and do something about them. Because you're right, most of the time they're unconscious. And if a belief is unconscious, you can't really do anything about it, because you're not even aware of it.
Right.
But that's what people are sort of living their lives believing, well, this is reality, this is how it is. And it's like, no, that's actually based on your beliefs. Those beliefs are unconscious. That's why it just feels like this is reality and I can't change it. But in fact, you can.
I find that when individuals discover that belief and they're able to change that, they actually have physiological changes. Their bodies actually begin to change to certain extent. Their facial expressions begin to change. There's another gentleman, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's kind of floating around the internet. Dr. David Snyder. Have you heard of that guy?
Yeah, I'm familiar with him.
Yeah. So I've heard him say a couple of things about the body and things like that, and doing exercises and things like that. So is it true that we can take a person from, like you said, it's that depressed state? You mentioned the depressed state before. Okay. What would be the steps? That's a better question. What would be the steps to take a person from a down state to we won't say a static, but at least stable state?
So again, values elicitation is super important, because what a value is, it's a generalization about an experience that's important to you. So like happiness would be a value. And that's probably because most people share that as a value, because we value happy experiences. And then how do I know that I have happy experiences? Well, then I think about times when I was happy and what I was doing. And so that's how we build those happy experiences. Depression is kind of like a fixation on all of the things that are going wrong, or that are not what you like. And so it's a hyper focus on those things. And so as an NLP practitioner, I would want to break that fixation, or intervene in that generalization that everything is bad. And one way that I could do that is just by understanding how they're structuring those thoughts and those ideas. Meaning, once again, like, where is it? Are they using visual, auditory representations? Where in their personal space, what we call location, are they organizing this? And then helping them access the opposite of depression. So that'd be probably more than one thing. There'd probably be like happiness, peace, joy. It'd probably be a multiple things. So it's finding out how they're doing depression, so to speak. How are they causing this? How are they making it happen? Then doing an intervention to break the pattern, and then having them bringing their attention to experiences that they do value, like happiness and joy and peace. And so I really elicit a lot of this from the client. I don't go in saying, okay, well, you need to be happy and here's how you do it. I want them to connect with that. So just asking them questions so that by answering my questions, they have to go inside and access this information. Have you ever been happy? And they're going to say, well, yeah, they've had happy experiences. So, and just saying that, they have to access that information. And so it's helping them access that information and then helping them organize that information in such a way that it feels very certain, very stable, and very solid. And that's going to just, how I would base that is just finding something they do feel very strong and solid and stable about, use that structure and map this into that structure.
Excellent, excellent. Now, you mentioned a while back on your show something about the swish pattern, or the swish technique. And I thought it was interesting because, first of all, I haven't seen individuals do that. I haven't seen that done. And I thought it was interesting because you had said that many individuals do not do it correctly. Mm-hmm. So what is the swish pattern? And we don't want to get into, I don't want to go too long with it, but just what is the swish pattern?
The swish pattern was really meant to be a simple pattern that intervenes with what we call a compulsion pattern. And so if you think about like a bad habit you have, and that could be overeating, that could be procrastination, or like binge watching Netflix, or binge eating, or any of these things where you feel very compelled to do, and like once that compulsion starts, it's like you feel like you can't stop. And so that was the original idea of using the swish pattern. And so what you do is you find out, well, what is happening when you sort of get caught in that tunnel vision where you feel like you're just compelled to do something, you can't stop yourself. And so one thing we know is that a person is very associated into that experience, meaning like I can think of, something that happened earlier this morning, and I see myself doing things, like I see myself brushing my teeth, I see myself doing my morning routine or whatever, and I can see that in my mind's eye, like I'm watching a character in a story or in a movie. And then there's I step into it and I'm associated, and I feel like I'm reliving it in real life. That's what we call associated. So we do both. Everybody does both. We have disassociated and associated. Well, when you fall prey to like a compulsion, it's one thing we know is that you're very associated. In fact, you're so associated into the experience that's why you feel like you can't snap out of it. It feels like this thing is just going and you're along for the ride. And so we need to find out, well, what is that original experience? And it's usually visual, not for everybody, but most people see this as a visual thing, like they see the food or they see the cigarette and they just can't stop themselves at that point. So we want to find out what is the trigger that causes the compulsion. And like I said, it's usually a very, very associated image. And so we start there. And then we set that aside. And then I have the person create an ideal image of themselves. An ideal image of themselves, the person who has solved every problem you've ever had, who's living your highest values, living your highest potential, and you make an image of yourself like that. And usually it's probably good to just do like head and shoulders, nothing more than that. And you want to leave out as much content as possible. So you don't want to see yourself doing anything in particular, and you don't want to see yourself in any location in particular. And the reason for that is if you swish it with you doing a particular behavior, and this is where most teachers teach it wrong, if you swish it with a particular behavior or a particular context, then the swish pattern is only going to work with that particular behavior and with that particular context. And this is the way that it was taught to me. It's also the way that it was taught to most people. And when I met Steve, he was the one who said, no, that's not how it is. You want to empty it of content. You don't want to have behavior or context. And I'll explain why in a moment once I finish explaining how the swish works. So what you do is you bring up the image of you when you're fully so associated and you feel that compulsion, and then you immediately swish up an image, that ideal image of yourself. So the ideal image of yourself, it interrupts that compulsion pattern, and redirects your attention to being that ideal you, which means you wouldn't be binging on that food or that cigarette or whatever that is. And so you practice this, you rehearse it like 10 times, and then you check in. Does it, you clear your mind, and then you bring up that associated image again. And if the ideal image automatically, without you having to try, automatically comes up, you know it's working. And then at that point, you don't practice it anymore. You let it slip back into your unconsciousness, because it's much more powerful when it's unconscious. If it's conscious, then you might try to negotiate with, and you go, well, I could have that cigarette, or well, I could have that food. But if it's unconscious, it just immediately interrupts the pattern and moves you toward where you're motivated to go to, being your ideal self. Now, the reason why adding content to it is a problem, which is the way that I was taught, and was the reason why I couldn't get this swish pattern to work until my mentor came along. So let's say I want to quit smoking, and I feel very compelled to smoke. And when I see a cigarette, it's like it's on. So we do the swish pattern, interrupt that pattern. Now let's say the ideal image of myself that I create is an ideal image of me working out of the gym, because I think, well, instead of smoking, I'd rather go work out at the gym. Well, what happens when you wake up at 3 a.m. and you want a cigarette and the gym's not open? You can't do it. So that breaks the swish pattern. It won't work. Or what if I had just gone to the gym and then I see a cigarette? Well, I just went to the gym. I'm not going to go back to the gym. So that's why trying to add a behavior in doesn't work. And then also, if you add a particular context in, like let's say I see myself at work, when I see that ideal image of myself, well, that when it goes to interrupt that compulsion, if you're not at work, it's probably not going to link up with the ideal image. And so again, the switch pattern won't work. So the key here is to leave out the behavior and leave out the context. And also you have to be careful when you're rehearsing the swish that you don't take, once you switch the ideal image up, you got to be careful that when you reset it, that you're not swishing them back, which a lot of people do. And so what happens is you get this yo-yo effect. And so when you're in the real life situation and that compulsion pattern goes off, then your ideal image switches up, and then it switches back down, and you're back into the compulsion image. And so, of course, it won't work that way. If that happens, you'll still go for the compulsion.
Wow, that's amazing. Lots of information there, okay, friends. If you have it packed down, okay, and you can look, this will be up on in the room for a good while. You can replay that and review that, because that's some powerful information and a technique that you can use yourself if you just listen. Now, that said, this man trains like a madman, and he has not just a YouTube channel, but he also has his own company, the Self-Concept company. And so could you tell us a little bit about your company? Tell us about Neuro Gym, and how you founded that. NLP Gym, let me get back away. Let me fix that. Okay, that's the other guy. Okay, the NLP Gym, tell us a little about that, about the channel also, and where else can we find you?
Okay.
What else have you got coming up?
Okay. Well, NLP Gym was the first name of my YouTube channel and the first name of my company. And eventually, after a period of time, I felt like that wasn't quite a good fit, because I go beyond NLP and talk about other things like philosophy and things like stoicism. So I wanted to free myself from only going into NLP. So I eventually just changed the channel to my name. And then so I've been using the self-concept model for quite a while, because like I said, I find it to be the most transformative and effective model. I was teaching it. It's the basis of all my coaching, but a lot of people didn't know about it. And so I was still teaching a lot of other stuff. And then one day this person comes to me for coaching, and we do about 3 months of coaching, and he really went through a lot of changes and a lot of transformations. And then he kind of disappeared for a while. I also found out in the course of our coaching that he was a very successful entrepreneur and had started many successful businesses, which if I mention some of them, you'd probably know what they are, but he doesn't like it when I do that. So
is that Nathan?
Yeah, that's Nate.
Yeah, I met Nathan. He's a cool guy.
Yeah, he's a very cool guy. So very humble too. Like he didn't tell me any of these things about himself, but just through the course of coaching, I was like, okay, who are you? Like I could tell he was a different kind of person. And then, so he disappears for a little while, and then he comes back and says, hey, do you want to talk business? And I thought he wanted more coaching. So I was like, yeah, sure. And so we got on a call. He had a whole PowerPoint ready, and he's like, I think what you're doing and what you're teaching can change the world, and I want to do this as a business, and I want to work with you. And I was like, what? Like, because this guy was, far more successful than me, and he was willing to walk away from all that to focus on this because he really believes it will change the world. And I had been thinking this for, the first time I came across this model as well. It was just, I found it incredibly difficult to like explain and market in a way that people would realize what it is that we were really doing. Because it's hard when you have something that does work so amazingly well and so effective, and then you go try to communicate that to people. Well, you kind of sound like everybody else who's selling all of their stuff too. You kind of sound like you get mixed in with the choir of noise out there in personal development. So it was like, I'm trying to tell people, no, this is the real deal. And it's like, yeah, that like you and everybody else says it. No, this is the real deal. It's like, okay. So anyway, when he came around, it was like, okay, now I have help in communicating this message. And still it's a challenge because for the same reasons that I just mentioned, it's just, you kind of sound like everybody else. And but anyway, he wanted to go into business, and I said, yeah, absolutely, let's do this. I knew that as partners we would be able to get this out there better than either just myself or just him alone. So we put together the self-concept research group, and we've been doing this as an online ongoing training program. And then we even started certifying coaches because we had people who were coming through. A lot of them, not all of them, but about half of them were coaches or aspiring coaches. And so they wanted to learn how to use the model to coach other people. And so we started that program. So it's been 3 years that we started this group, and it's been going really well. It's amazing to watch people transform and hear their stories and how they're bringing this into their lives, and also our coaches who are helping people transform into the people they want to become. And so it's really amazing what it's turned into, and to be a part of this. And I just get to, I have the greatest job in the world. I just get to share this stuff with as many people as possible.
I can see your passion for it every time I'm in the room. And, Nathan is so cool to talk to also, just, all you guys, very down to earth.
Yeah.
And see, like I said a little while ago, it's like comparing you and the NLP icon, Tony Robbins. If we were compare oceans, it's like Tony Robbins is the raging storm, but you are that placid ocean. You kind of bring things to shore, a little bit gently. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. We're not walking across beds of fire, hot coals. We're not, and things like that. But you have done so much, and your companies are growing and actually helping people. They are effecting change in the world. So I have one last question I'm going to ask you before we close out. So, Damon Cart, what does it mean to you to crush your mountain?
That's an interesting metaphor. I think every one of us is extraordinary, and unfortunately a lot of people leave it inside of themselves and don't really get to know what it's like to express that extraordinariness in a way of creating the life that they want to live. And it was interesting what you were saying about Tony Robbins. Like, yeah, he's that iconic guy, and a lot of people look at him as like the gold standard, and they often think of like that's the life that they want to live. And for some people, I think that is the ultimate life. And to live that would be living your purpose and living your truth. But I would say for the majority of us, that's not it. And so for me, discovering what my mountain is, super important. And then not the achievement of getting to the top of the mountain, but enjoying the process of getting to the top of the mountain. Because I spent so much of my life thinking of like these lofty goals and going after them, not enjoying the process. And when I would get to a point where I would quit, I would think that I just didn't have it in me, or wasn't disciplined enough. And really what it turned out was it just really wasn't aligned with my values. So at a certain point, it's just, I I was doing it to impress people. I was doing it for status or what, all the wrong reasons. And then the times when I did achieve and it wasn't aligned with my values, it felt very empty. And so I think, first of all, knowing what it is that's really going to do it for you, what is really going to align with your values, which is going to make you feel purposeful and like what you're doing has true meaning and that it fulfills you every step of the way. That I think is, if everyone in the world could do that, tap into what it is that really fulfills them and then just do it, not all of us would be running across the stage and slapping our chest, and not all of us would be walking on fire. Each one of us would be expressing our individual extraordinariness. And I think that would be that's the world that I want to live in. And this is why I teach what I teach. And I think individual fulfillment leads to a world that is fulfilled. And in that fulfillment, we do extraordinary things because part of fulfillment is fulfilling your potential. And so if we were all fulfilled and fulfilling our potential, what could we not do in this world? What could this world not do? And so that's the world that I want to live in. Will it ever happen in my lifetime or ever at all? I don't know. It doesn't matter to me because the process of doing what I'm doing is so fulfilling that that's enough for me. And so I think that if everybody could and really embody that and live the life that's really fulfilling to them, they do uplift the world. They're better for the world. Of course, they're better for themselves. And that's the best that we can do. So that's what I guess how I would define crushing your mountain.
That is so amazing still, because each individual does have a purpose. Mm-hmm. And people need to realize that they can shape their reality. Mm-hmm. We tend to walk through life as zombies, so to speak. We tend to allow the randomness of the world in which we live affect us and shape us and mold us, and then we accept that as how it is and how it should be. Mm-hmm. But what individuals like Damon is saying is that you have the power to make the change. And you've heard me say that so many times, friends. You have the power, the ability to make the change for yourself. So again, if we can go to YouTube and find Damon Cart, learn some of his techniques, listen to him, join the self-concept research group, jump in, become part of that, learn the process. He'll take you through it. He'll tell you a little bit more of his stories. You'll see pictures that he's ashamed to show. But more importantly, you'll learn more about yourself, and you'll have the tools to make the change within yourself, in your life, and even help others. So Damon, I want to thank you again for taking the time to come here on this humble channel, humble show. And like I always tell all the friends at the end of the show, take charge of your life when it comes to reducing or reversing type 2 diabetes, when it comes to finding a new way of living for yourself, improving that. When it comes to losing weight, it starts with your mindset. And that's why I have him on, because your mindset, your determination, your understanding your why, reading the map of the territory you think that you're in, all of that comes down to being able to crush your mountain. As I always say, don't just climb your mountain, crush it. And we'll see you next time. Thanks again, my friend.
Thank you.